what was the reason that Vienna became that center, I mean, this hub, and what could be done to preserve this hub status?
Building such a hub, that takes a long time.
Does it mean that Central Europe is more well, the financial sector was built around the banks?
We're free now. We got to revamp our society, our economy. We get rid of the state. I mean, liberalization and privatization were the big topics.
In Armenia,
I think it's very important.
That it says that polished stone won't lay on the soil, so it will be used in construction.
What I've learned in my life, I always also thought that if you really go for something and you really put your energy into this, you're almost, you deserve the outcome that you're looking for.
Բարև ձեզ իմ ընկերներ, այսօրվա իմ հյուրն է Christian Schopper-ը, այսօր խոսելու ենք անգլերեն. Christian is professor of corporate finance. He is consulting big corporations and also had a huge interest in arts and advising artists around the world for their benefit, mainly because of the just having a big interest in being kind and helpful to good people. And welcome to my podcast, Christian, and it's my pleasure to host you here. And I'm glad you visited Armenia. I think it's not your first time, but it's the first time we met here.
Yeah, I'm so. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so pleased to see you, I guess, after 7 years or so that we met last time. And yes, I was in Armenia, I guess, also 7-8 years ago. The first time traveled across the country. But I promise you, next time I'll pass by your vineyards as well, which unfortunately we didn't make this time.
Yeah, that's actually a good reason to visit Armenia next time. But the older we become, I noticed that it's more difficult to drink more wine.
I was never good at this, not as a young one either. And frankly honest, until a couple of years ago, I didn't drink any wine at all. I don't drink beer, usually hardly any, maybe once a year with fish and chips and having a Guinness, that's fine. But the biggest joke was when I actually started my career in banking, as in the first couple of years, and the Iron Curtain came down. When I was working out of Vienna, one of my first mandates was selling a vineyard in Tokaj. And actually was sold then to Rothschild. And everybody was laughing because I had no clue about wine and wine production, but still became expert in this because I had to do some due diligence and really show to potentially interested investors, how this works and what makes actually a Tokaj wine different from other wines, all in the wine production. So everyone was laughing because I'd actually never tried a Tokaj wine before.
However, you are living in Vienna, and Vienna is a wine region actually itself as a city even.
Yes, correct. Yeah,
and
even downtown, even when you are in Ringstraße, we have actually a very small vineyard at Schwarzenbergplatz. It's literally next to Ringstraße.
And Ringstraße is just covering the central part, like
correct.
historical part.
Correct.
Correct. Yerevan has the same ring.
Yes, you have a ring here. Yeah.
And
you have also vineyards there.
Yeah, no vineyard. I mean, there are some, but they're not used for wine.
There is one that's very interesting. When Austria was occupied, the main headquarters of the Allied forces was on Schwarzenbergplatz, and actually opposite where is this vineyard. It's small. Don't ask me. It has maybe 60, 70 square meters. Literally very small. But every year there's wine produced from there. Yeah, which you can buy. Funny.
So just back to your background. I was always curious as your student in New Economic School and later. So you were working in one of the best investment banks like Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, and Merrill and other banks, and I think it was just well compensated. Why did you decide just to change your life to leave the investment banking's field and
Yeah.
go to like more free fields like consulting and
Yeah.
being a professor, which is just
Yeah.
also it's not easy.
So to start with, I was teaching even at the beginning of my professional career already. So I was, as long as I've been in banking, I've always been teaching. So it was not only later that I started teaching, actually very much in parallel. You must imagine when I was working in London, Morgan Stanley, I even took holidays to teach at university. Yes, that's what I was a bit crazy about this. But why did I leave about 2 decades ago, the kind of big banking, the big investment banks? The bottom line is it was no more fun. The industry had changed substantially. And when I stopped about 2002, 2003, there were basically, I think, two reasons for this. It was the fun factor, but it was also a mistake to some extent that I didn't quite foresee, because I'd been a long time at Morgan Stanley, where I basically learned the professional investment banking. Because within Austria was investment banking too, but it was a different level. I have to admit nowadays, looking back. But the interesting observation was then I realized that even when two companies of banks look from an organizational chart the same, the culture may be entirely different. And what I didn't appreciate back then is that Morgan Stanley in the 1930s was founded as an M&A boutique, as an advisory boutique in essence. And Mr. Merrill and Mr. Lynch around 1900, I think 1899, 1900, started as brokers. This is still something you feel today in the culture of these firms. And frankly honest, Merrill Lynch also wasn't quite my culture in regards to teamwork. I think this was the major force. But the other element also came there that, but that's an observation you have seen across the industry. The industry became increasingly less about what I like to do. And what I like to do is you have a client, the client has a problem, you go there and try to fix this with the tools that you have in finance. And what I experienced around 2000, the first time, is that we were asked to push products. And this is not something I wanted to do. This, in my view, in many cases didn't make sense because I knew these clients, I knew what they needed. And, we basically had calling lists, to be honest. There was kind of okay, this month is kind of this product and it's new or they developed something. Don't ask me anymore. And, we had our clients that we covered and we were expected to basically speak with each client about this. And I knew in many instances that didn't make sense to do. So this change that came about, and by the way, today investment banking is entirely different than it was in my days. These days are gone. The industry looks very different today. That was the reason why I said I'd take a break.
So, but what was the fun first? Because at my age, when I entered the industry, we were like, is a heaven.
Yeah,
it's just top of your desire, just to get into the investment banking. Later, we understood what it is actually. But at the beginning, it was so glamorous.
So, let's face it. For me, it was an amazing experience and learning experience. I had no clue what investment banking is to start with. So you must imagine before I joined Morgan Stanley, and before I joined Morgan Stanley, I made my MBA in Lausanne at IMD. We had started a startup in 1989 under the umbrella of Kreditanstalt. 5 people who set up a corporate finance boutique. Now today, Kreditanstalt, an Austrian bank, long tradition, by the way, founded by Rothschilds, here we are with wine, is today part of UniCredit. And back then, we were 5 individuals in Vienna, in an old flat, we weren't even in the main building of Kreditanstalt. We said, let's see whether there's a market for this. Now, none of us had ever sold a company, including me. My background is in finance, actually. I'm a lawyer. and I'm an industrial computer scientist, and my dissertation is about system dynamic models on the one hand, and on laws, it's about data protection. For me, finance was new, but it was an interesting, fascinating area. And so, the point really is, first of all, I stumbled into this whole industry and I found this then very interesting. I found it mentally challenging. And I found this also insofar interesting, all these aspects come together. One mustn't forget Austria, where I come from, in 1989, had about half its border surrounded by the Iron Curtain. Okay? So when this came down suddenly, this was a complete shift and change, right? And that was exactly the moment when we had the startup. And this was exactly the moment when all this privatization suddenly kicked off. This Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, everybody was saying, oh, we're free now. We got to revamp our society, our economy. We get rid of the state. Liberalization and privatization were the big topics then. So we were sort of diving into this. So it was not only this, this is a prestigious bank, because honestly, our bank wasn't prestigious at all. It was a startup, right? But it was this amazing mood and spirit that you had then, this complete change, this revolution, actually. And I remember on my first business trip with Kreditanstalt that went in January 1990, so right after the fall of the wall, to Prague. Today you travel about 3 hours by train. Back then it was a 6-hour train drive. And I took my camera with me. And I was in Wenzel Square, despite the fact these were business meetings. But the moment I had actually an hour free, I went to Wenzel Square and made photos there because the candles were still standing there. And there was literally still blood on the street because there were, I think, 1 or 2 people killed actually in December. Also just like 2-3 weeks before I was there. So you could feel this revolution. So coming back, for me, it wasn't about prestige. For me, this was about, that's history. This is a complete change, but also you can improve something in these countries for these societies. So, today, I know investment banking is very often associated with greed, aggressiveness, prestige, and whatever. This wasn't at all an issue back then. So I really got into this out of excitement, history, change, doing something good. So naive this may sound. But I have to admit, this was also still, despite the fact that I'm working for Morgan Stanley, was different style and very much professional. But in essence, underlying, there were still the same themes and topics. And even then, when I was traveling somewhere, if I had an hour free, I went to a museum. And even I took clients to museums. When we had a tough time, they look, time out, we go to a museum, we walk through the galleries, chit-chat a little bit about what the issue is, and they go back to the meeting. So, that was kind of also my philosophy. Also this prestigious, this elitist or whatever, this didn't necessarily drive me. This wasn't nothing. What drove me was the curiosity. And I really sort of had fun in working with clients together, and it didn't matter right now whether it would any kind of brand be. And the moment I didn't have this anymore, this prestigious, even the money, to be honest, was not something that actually drove me that much any longer.
But if you look to the industry, you exactly was the locations, the cities, which was you just can lead this revolution of there was leading the wave of change, because through London was covered all the investment banking deals in Eastern Europe, in Russia. Later, you start collaborate. I think you visited a lot Moscow and worked there as a professor and also consulted a lot. So, and now you are in Yerevan. So, now what do you see in common in Yerevan with these cities and with different time frame? I mean, timeline. Let's see. Do you see something in common which is happening in Armenia? You, I think, have analyzed a lot of news and even developments here. I think you haven't been here any before with business. So
no,
you are true. With business now here.
Yeah. also a long story. Also, for instance, we met in Moscow, and I can't even say how many years this is now. 12 years.
10.
10 years. Fine, 10 years. Imagine following. When I started traveling to Moscow, I had no business there. I had no assignment at the university. I just said, look, I'm interested in this country. I want to know more. I took my money, reserved a hotel, and once a month flew to Moscow for about 10 days. And with the map, back then, honestly, Google Maps, I think, wasn't even invented yet, or wasn't as good. And was trying to explore the city, and out of my own. I didn't have any firm, any background, any umbrella of a Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch any longer. Get to know people and see what I can do. And I was thinking along basically 2 lines again. I found this exciting. I wanted to experience the wide plains of the Russian steppe, right? My brother had worked in Sakhalin, I immediately went out there to see Sakhalin, I'd read Chekhov and all this. I said, I want to see this. So the first thing was, again, it was actually my curiosity in regards to Russia. And then, when I said, okay, what could I do here? With the sentiment to spend more time there to get to know the country better. Yeah, a couple of situations opened up, and there was one, increasing teaching. And I've been teaching basically every university in at least in Moscow, also from Resh Financial University, Presidential Academy, High School of Economics, gigs at Skolkovo and Skoltech, and literally all over the place. But also I assumed some board seats back then in private equity. As I said, that started, and on the side, clearly there were assignment in regards to advisory. But again, I'm telling you this because the thing always is, it wasn't that this finance or whatever came first, but again, it was, I like finance. I'm still excited about finance, but I still believe, and naively also when I did my assignment in Russia, I thought that my contribution would do something to improve the country, the society, to do something. Also, I'm not a cemeterian, but really to have a positive contribution. And clearly what happened, and I could see this latest around 14 and 15, and you could see this is not going quite the way I expected. But that really what drove me. And Armenia, look, I came here for pleasure. I came here because I wanted to see your churches, and I wanted to see the mountains. And I'd heard a lot about it. Of course, I had no clue. And then, I basically arranged myself. I was a couple of days myself, first in Yerevan, and then I organized a driver and a car, and then went across the country and see your basically major sites. And by the way, moved then on to Georgia, because back then, I think I spent about 2 weeks here and about 2 or 3 weeks then in Georgia, same way, And, most recently, as this potential assignment that we are currently working on, that's more or less a coincidence. This came out of network as it is, word of mouth, and suddenly you start doing something here. But maybe one more last sentence. What I found quite interesting, and don't get me right, and this morning I had with Andrew also an exchange of thoughts on this, and on a footnote here, so my brother, who I visited back then in Sakhalin, today works in Lebanon. Basically on energy projects and water projects, for communities, but also for refugees from Syria. And they've done the same before, actually in Jordan over the last 1.5 years. And the interesting thing is what we see in these countries, as I don't want to compare Armenia with Lebanon, but a certain normality, sorry to say, which my brother or even Andrew, myself, reminds me a little bit of my childhood, right? The people are friendly, maybe it's a bit slower, I don't know, maybe it's a bit longing for this old time that we can't see, in the more speedy cities where we're coming from. And we feel actually quite comfortable about this. Also, don't get me wrong, a little bit stereotyping here,
absolutely. That's the reason.
But it is a certain aspect, and look, I mean, I like it here. I like the climate. You see the mountains around me. It reminds me of home, and it's in that regard, it's very nice to be here, right?
Yeah,
and exploring. It's again exploring. I mean, like actually before I came here for 2 hours, I was immediately in your museum for Armenian history, right? I mean, I just come from there, because it excites me, to learn and listen a little bit more about, a country and history. And I remember this time I don't have time for this, but maybe in 3 weeks I can do it. I know one of the oldest books worldwide that exist are here in Yerevan.
Yeah.
And I saw them last time, I want to see them again.
Yeah, if we just look at into Armenia, to Armenia, economy-wise or business-wise, do you think that countries start changing back to compared to your last visit and this year? Do you see some movements which are just good for investment bankers as well? Let's say, is anything resemble let's say, growing economies or non-growing economies? What is your situation? I mean, view from your helicopter view.
Yeah.
What has changed, and what is the do you see could change here?
Yeah. Also, to be very honest, to compare now from 7 years ago, about 7, 8 years ago, I was here the first time, and now it's very fun when I talk to Sasha, okay, and Sasha said, "Look, Yerevan has changed a lot recently," and he knows it much better than me. My first feeling was, it's not so much different. I found it took me like an hour or so, but I immediately then recognized some places, and you fairly quickly actually familiarize yourself with the major landmarks, and then you find your way around. So it hasn't changed so much. On the other hand, I mean, you observe here things that you see anywhere. Wherever you go, so that the kids are hanging around on their mobile phones a lot, and I mean, there are certain patterns here, like, I don't know, the traffic jams. That's kind of.
But you have 7 years ago, there were not that much traffic jams.
Perhaps, but I say I can't really. For me, I must honestly remember. For me, it's pretty much the way I remember this. I've definitely been to places. A couple of years later, where I say, I hardly recognize this place any longer. Yeah, it exists, but I cannot say this is what happened to this place here, And I would assume for a second that I've been in the countryside this time, that has changed that much. Maybe yes. So that's one part maybe of a question. The other one, in regards to opportunities. That's quite interesting, and I need to look more into this, because I didn't come here for business development, because then I would take a little bit of different approach. But when I look at the moment where the banking sector is, I would be curious to see actually where the telecom sector is, where the utility sector is. I think, so my suspicion is right now we are, at a stage or a point in some of these industrial sectors that I've observed literally quite a while ago in some other countries. So that is, it resembles much more my nostalgia, when I was back, let's say, in Poland, or working in Bulgaria on let's say, privatization of the oil sector or the insurance sector or something like this. But for this, I literally need to dive more into this. One thing is obvious, and you can't ignore that the market around us, around the country, is also changing. So just as an instance here, stock exchange, it is small, it is illiquid, and the issue really is also, and we had the same issue in Vienna years ago, because I tell you, when I stumbled into banking, nobody knew we had a stock exchange actually in Vienna. It was one of the oldest in the world as well, surprise, surprise. But it certainly the issue these days, how you develop this locally, or to be very honest, whether there should be regional hubs where so actually, you pull a larger region together. And my understanding, for instance, is right now that in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan. There are efforts, we'll see where it goes, to have such concept, to bring in more liquidity and to concentrate more the attention of the financial community at a spot. Like also in the past, before Brexit, was so much easier in Europe, because if there was anything really finance, you flew to London. Now, between you and me, it's a mess, because for certain
Vienna
aspects you
also
go somewhere else.
participated in this competition at certain point. But why do you think Vienna lost its competition to London, and London lost, I think, competition to New York or to Dubai?
Naja, also Vienna had never any
Ambition?
I'd say Vienna had never any standing regarding London. Well, the point is, look, here's a catch. For a financial hub, and I'm always laughing because I remember that President Medvedev, when he was president, once said, okay, we want to create a financial hub, literally a financial hub in Moscow. And, I'd worked also on strategy actually in Vienna at the stock exchange. And when you really reflect the business model of a stock exchange and the biotope around this, you will appreciate that there are many, many elements you need to develop this. This is not just about rules and regulation and about having a nice building. This is about do I have funds, such as do I have a developed pension system or mutual funds around? Do I have a sophisticated investor community out there? Do I have research analysts? Do I have traders? Do I have education? Do I have journalists who are following this? Also, what I mean is, you need, to create something where, say, and despite the fact I know in Moscow back then, everybody knew actually the oil price, and in London actually you could speak to the taxi driver about share price, which is something you never could do in Austria, right? I mean, in Vienna, it's just no way, people wouldn't know. But the point I'm making is there are quite a number of elements you got to get right and together, and you got to grow them and nurture them.
You mean the
history,
traditions of the financial sector?
Yeah, it takes time. I mean, also in London, I mean, we had all this, and still London is important. But fact is, there's some elements now drifting off, and it's actually not so straightforward. So if I have a European client today, I say, as I said, 15 years ago, I would say, you go to London because there's everything in one place. Nowadays, you'd say, let's think about this. In Luxembourg are more the funds, and in Paris, you have corporate finance. Actually, in Frankfurt, there's also corporate finance. Back office, whatever you have more in Dublin.
Diverge, right?
The thing really is, you got to think about what it is you need, and when discussing and fly to the right place. So it's, and last sentence to this, it takes decades to build this, but I say fairly quickly you can destroy this. That's the problem. So even for London building this, I'm not saying it's over. I think actually it could catch up from where they are right now again. But as a matter of fact, building such a hub, that takes a long time. But you actually destroy it fairly quickly.
Yeah, and but why I'm asking is because still Austrian banks are very strong, at least couple of them, and they have subsidiaries not only in Austria but outside of it, and it means does it mean that Central Europe is more like the financial sector was built around the banks, and banks never liked any competition from capital markets. That's why just they used capital markets as like puppets, just to show up that we have some exchange. Here it is, there's some trades, but there were no actual big work because FX was traded through banks, and I think the only country I've done research, and it's only Brazil and Russia who and Hong Kong and Singapore, where you can just trade foreign exchange, and the markets are liquid for trading foreign exchange. But the rest of the world is just traded only through major banks.
Yeah, but is this interesting? How do this hub actually merge? Why these places, right? And I would say, well, is it a surprise that the CME is in Chicago? No, if you ever travel to Chicago and look around there, you will understand why actually all derivatives more or less start in agriculture, why the CME is the CME. Because for hundreds of kilometers around Chicago, there's nothing but agriculture. And it's therefore clear that this had to happen in Chicago, right? I mean, today you have all sorts of derivatives, but so again, you see this, and I reach out a little bit to Michael Porter, the competitiveness of nations, which is basically cluster building, right? So, you see it even here. Yeah, there was a demand out there, and derivatives come from the farming sector. And because there was this huge farming sector out there, that's where derivatives are. And there was no surprise that accounting and banking started in Venice. It was because of trading, and because of accounting transparency, because you want to assess your risk when you send off a ship. But I mean, coming back quickly to the Austrian banks, so to start with, we're a small country. I mean, and there wasn't much to grow in our country, and you didn't really see these Austrian banks going west. They went east or southeast, right? So again, this was logical to take an opportunity here because this market was underserved and also not very sophisticated back then. I mean, surprise, surprise. So that they went there and clearly built either organically or mostly through acquisitions, kind of a network. Regarding stock exchanges, so I haven't looked in detail recently, but sort of what has crystallized when you look at the Central European stock exchanges, in my view, as far as I recall, Budapest or Prague really doesn't play a role. But Warsaw, for instance, isn't it interesting? Warsaw is the hub. So Warsaw, again, cluster building. Warsaw has crystallized not only as basically the stock exchange for Central and Eastern Europe, maybe to some extent competing with Vienna, but even I think Warsaw these days is more prominent. But not only this, and here they are clearly way ahead. I can't even call it financial center Vienna. When you look at private equity, for instance, private equity in Central Europe, it's Warsaw where you gotta go. You may also find this in Munich. But so we in Austria don't have this. It's very, very interesting.
When you say private equity, these private equity funds, where do they get finance? I mean, the funds for investment.
Yeah.
Are they allowed to raise from, do they raise from pension funds, or it's mainly private families' money, or it's even insurance money? How do they just structure it in Central Europe?
Very, very interesting. And you hit a point here. When I look at Austria, for instance, it's mostly family offices. Okay. The problem also here is what I see generally when I look at my country and the developing of the capital market or generally financial markets there is, we don't really have institutional money or funds, starting actually with venture capital and then going into the private equity. I don't even speak about private debt. I mean, there's mezzanine though a little bit, but there isn't much. We don't have this. When you look at Warsaw, this is much more institutionalized, such as insurance companies or other drivers. Another reason could be, but for this I'm these days not very familiar to talk about, clearly private pension, right? The private kind of the third tier, right? So sort of the private pension savings and funds and all this. This seems to be much more developed, even in Poland, than it is in my country, right? And that's quite interesting. This may also be due to the fact that clearly, these countries coming from the communist era and then later on, I mean,
so there
weren't big pension. Well, I mean, there wasn't much to have. I mean, honestly, a state pension, there wasn't really much, if at all. Can really live off this. So I guess for these individuals, thinking rationally and completely logic, it is you gotta basically save yourself. Meanwhile, in my country, frankly honest, this was something which was never an issue. For it was clear the government gotta provide your pension. It's only over the last 10, 15 years it became more clear that probably you should also do something for yourself. So some of these countries have really done immediately quantum leap ahead out of the circumstances that you
Yeah, that
were
sort of
confronted
skipped
with.
some like problematic period of the development. It's like I've seen in Russia then digitalization went much faster
Yes.
than in Europe because they sort of had a bad time in 90s. So after that, just the technology developed, and they just immediately skipped one generation of the development
Yes.
and went to the like newest
Yes.
one.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
it is interesting. For us, this was a learning process. And for individuals in Russia, it wasn't a learning process because that's what you started with. You didn't know anything old. I
else.
mean, I exaggerate a little bit, but it's really like this. And therefore, these societies have adapted as much faster. And it's no surprise that today groups like Sberbank, for instance, and there are other cases as well, are more advanced than when you see in Austria or in Germany. Yeah, it's no surprise. It's clear. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I wish in Armenia we would that really
I
good
guess here
application.
probably as well. I can't judge this, to be honest, but I could imagine this is the case here as well.
No, you have just admiration to art, and also you consult artists about how to develop their career as a businessman and an artist at the same time. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? Why do this? And and do you think there are also hubs for artists? And Vienna, for a long time, used to be a hub for classic music artists. I mean, for players and music players and conductors. I know this is like a standard setter for them.
Yeah.
What was the reason that Vienna became that center? I mean, this hub, and what could be done to preserve this hub status?
Yeah. Also, how I got into all this myself, it started with a clash. And it was a very good friend of mine who one day approached me and said, well, she wants to create this sculpture, but she needs money for this. And I said, you need a business plan. And I got to tell this an artist. I said, you need a budget, a timetable. You got to, when you pitch this project, basically also got to communicate to this corporate why they should actually deal with you, or why the sculpture sort of fits in their, corporate strategy, their image, and so on and so forth. And clearly, this complete misunderstanding and culture clash, and complete, there were two worlds here talking to each other. That incentivized me to basically dive into this area, a little bit more. And as you said before, that I ran then, seminars and workshops for artists on strategy. Yes. I mean, as an artist, you can have a strategy, or how you position your art in the art market, or how you raise funds, or how you manage a project, and actually also how the arts market works. Because my view always was, as an artist, you're an entrepreneur. I believe that, your inspiration and your creativity and your genius is maybe 2% of the whole business that you're in. And the rest is actually that what many artists, frankly honest, don't want to really do, which is, having a database and a website and a pitch book, and going out to potential collectors and present their art. And yeah, it's this usual kind of marketing.
Sales.
Yes. We're in the middle of this.
this.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because I believe, look, in generally, we speak here a little bit about life, and what I've learned in my life. I always also thought that if you really go for something and you really put your energy into this, you almost, you deserve the outcome that you're looking for. And for me, it was a very hard and painful process, to be very honest, to accept that luck is a very important component in life. Right? So for me, this was for a long time unacceptable. Really? The luck was absolutely unacceptable. And today I see the world very different, because I see actually any of us as a series of coincidences. Now, of course, you got to be ready for something, but there's a lot of luck. And I actually elaborate on this a little bit, because so many people say, oh, they've done a great career because they're so good and so bright and so I don't know what. And frankly honest, no. There's a lot of luck you had. There are much better people out there than you. So, that's to start with. So the thing is, when you believe as an artist that the collector stumbles in by the door, there's a luck factor. Yeah, that's when you're lucky. But you gotta be, even then, when by coincidence, even if this lucky punch or lucky incident happens, you gotta be ready, right? You're not gonna blow that moment. And so therefore, I think, this really it, and this being prepared, this professional, this thinking, this in
Armenia,
I think it's very important.
That it said that polished stone won't lay on the soil, so it will be used in construction.
Right.
So,
right.
There is a luck to be used, but you have to be polished.
Yes.
So
It's the same. I'm discussing this a lot with clients, who consider an IPO as a bit of flotation on the stock exchange. And frankly honest, I had transactions where on the last night I had to pull the deal because the market wasn't there. And we had worked like 9 months on a transaction, right? You can imagine, and all this money that's been spent is lawyers and bankers and auditors, and you're pulling a deal the night before. So the point is, there's bad luck. Okay, but the thing is, you can't even get this moment if you're not prepared. You have to be prepared, right? And then it's up to luck to some extent whether it happens or not. No? So that's sort of one area, but the other is a little bit these clusters,
Vienna art cluster. Because I have a feeling that about Armenian, when I moved out of Moscow, and I saw that really Yerevan is full of art because kids have easier access to theaters, to museums, and they even just connection between really famous just artists and the child and children are very tight because they teach it in the schools like theater schools or artistic schools. But I know that the Vienna somehow managed to embrace a lot of artists from around the world. It's not only from surrounding countries.
Yeah, though historically, when you think about this,
conservatory.
Okay, we had Mina saying, running around all through the Danube, all this, but I make this comparison maybe for a moment with the Middle Ages again. In the Middle Ages in cities, it was very clear that, if there was a shoemaker, funny, today we wouldn't probably do this, but if you're also a shoemaker, you would actually position your shop in the same street. And actually, this is the one who made nails, the one who makes laces, and so on and so forth. It's really interesting. That's why actually in Vienna, when you go through the inner city, from history, that was the city. This was the street where the shoemakers were, and this were the clothes manufacturers, and so on and so forth. So the thing is, it's quite fun. It may start sometimes as a coincidence, and then you have a pull factor because of an individual who is charismatic, and does this and passes on also this experience probably to the next generation. As you know, with compositors, this is absolutely something which is common as well. So again, this is a little bit about building a cluster. This is not happening by coincidence. And today, of course, you can say, well, Vienna has all this. We have our concert hall and the operas, and we have the music schools, various music schools, and we have performances. And over time, and this I found so interesting also in Russia, the big difference between St. Petersburg and Moscow. Oh. St. Petersburg remember much more Vienna because on the next day, people in the coffee house would discuss last night's opera or symphony orchestra performance or something like this. In Moscow, frankly honest, I never had this, right? It was, because it's no one discusses. Oh, definitely, there's great art in Moscow, no doubt about it. Yeah, particular when you think about all these small little galleries and clubs and all this you have, it's fantastic actually. But it's quite interesting, like St. Petersburg, which is much smaller, right? For instance, that you have, funny enough, this kind of culture where even the society is nurturing this, if you want to. So I believe you cannot necessarily plan this. I think it's starting quite often with individuals. It's like, bring you another example.
Probably government as well. They just
Yeah.
make it easier for documents. I don't know if you are in with a specific industry, so that they're just
But look, I mean, let's take a step back. When you look back at Paris 1900, okay, where basically, I mean, everybody was running around there, from Modigliani and a Picasso, and everybody came there, and it was.
didn't support
I mean,
it.
government didn't play any role. Why was it? I mean, to some extent, it was also geopolitical circumstances that people ended up there. But it started basically with a couple of crazy individuals and a couple of risk takers, also as gallerists and also as collectors, who basically bought up something that nobody knew. I mean, I can give you in Vienna also this example of Mr. Leopold. Mr. Leopold, who died a couple of years ago, is the largest collector of Chile in the world, and we have now this museum, the Leopold Museum in Vienna, which has the largest collection of Chile.
How much he paid?
Well, the thing is, he started buying Chile even as a student, when you came for a couple of pennies, because nobody wanted to have Chile's paintings and drawings, because they all say that's obscene, that's pornography, this is too radical. And for whatever reason, Mr. Leopold liked it. And it wasn't necessarily even him that he said he pushed it one day. I mean, you can do something like this, of course, but it was a maybe change of taste in society and all that people got interested in. Now, I mean, you cannot even pay a single, pencil drawing of Mr. Chile, right? So, here we are. So I'd say I believe in industry that's actually even a little bit easier to do this if you have this kind of vision, despite the fact that it's never wrong. I mean, Silicon Valley also started with a couple of geeks. Then you have this maybe in art, but at the end of the day, it's
can you
about
consider for yourself art as an investment, like a Chile collector?
No, I never did.
And
never.
When you left the
you can do it. Sorry, only on this one. You can do it. And right now I'm pursuing actually an idea of an art index, because I had always this idea in my mind. I mean, what if you are a really avid, let's say, a collector of Picasso, right? You have Picassos all over the place. And you as a banker yourself, you know how this is. It's basically a lump sum risk, right? I'm long, very long, too long actually, Picasso. So my question was, how do you short Picasso? Right? I mean, we know what to do in finance, right? Can we do something in the art scene? I mean, these days, yes, art is also an investment cluster. I don't deny this. Did I ever perceive it myself? Did I ever buy any single piece because of investment? Never. I saw something that I liked.
Ex-investment banker, how did you invest your savings? Because why I'm asking, because
Badly.
our life has really changed, and a lot of people has left big corporations. But what do you suggest them? Who even in finance or out of finance, if they change their life and going from like monster corporations to their own journey, how to be with own investments?
Also, to start with myself, I teach at university what has to be done, and myself I don't do it. Okay, also. I'm awful. As an investor, I'm actually awful. So when I look at my asset composition, probably it's mostly real estate, cash, and then I have a couple of funds that I look into every 1 or 2 years where they're standing. So I'm absolutely opposite of someone who checks every day where shares are, and probably my very first job was at Raiffeisen as a Eurobond fund manager. And after a year and a half, I left this because I found this so awful and so boring. And I said, I'm not a trader. I want to work with clients on problems, on strategy and long term. That interests me. I'm not interested in the daily change in volatility. I don't care.
No, I'm not saying just.
So So,
stocks, or it could be real estate. But have you
yeah.
considered just to have some backup for yourself?
Yeah. No, clearly. I mean, so my assumption, for instance, was that I will never have a pension. And you may say, how stupid is this? You know, in Austria, we have a really solid pension fund, a pension system. And frankly honest, despite the fact the government is subsidizing this every year more and more. But I never counted. I say, I got to care about myself, right? So I'm very conservative. I'm extremely conservative. I have zero debt. I have real estate, diversified. I have some liquidity, and that's basically it. And some funds, as I said, that I look into, from time to time.
Did you make this decision about creating some of this backup right after you left, or on the later? You just think that it could be good just to have some backups?
No, it's the real estate was for myself, and also, as I said, look, it's a substance. As I said, I didn't even. It's safe, right? I mean, it's really interesting. One should actually do this, like the Jewish community has done for hundreds and hundreds of years. And, in mind of their horrible history and what always happened to Jews, as we know, it was a third real estate, a third cash, and a third gold, for all the reasons. Because, you got to be liquid in order to take your things and run, but you also got to have some inflation protection, for instance. There was a logic behind this. I never really had this logic. As I'm sorry, it's quite interesting. I'm communicating many of this efficient market theory and whatever, and I'm not doing it myself really. And maybe because you said for young individuals, I think one aspect is something I've become kind of increasingly aware, or I can't say not that I don't understand the younger generation anymore, but fact is, there are some aspects we tick differently. And when I see nowadays that there are individuals, kids who, they have a good job for 1 or 2 or 3 years and they have some money and they say, okay, I'll take a year off because I want to see the world now. And I must say, at the same time, amazing. I think it takes courage.
It's good to spend everything.
Well, I mean, it's a life experience, right? I mean, it's an amazing thing. I also don't know whether this has to do with the fact that, and I see a lot of this. As you know, I have probably these days. I see every year between 500 to 1,000 students that I have approximately in my classes, right? And I see the problems they have. I see the problems they have in recruiting, the problems they have in getting good jobs, the really brutal competition, the fact that actually even when there are recruiting processes, how they are even exploited by time to time with fake recruiters. I mean, I've seen all these kind of things. So the big issue for them is really how to get the horsepower on the road, right? And therefore, in my days, it was also hard to find a job. I'm very honest with you. I didn't send emails back then. I sent letters. And from 100 letters, I maybe get 3 answers. And maybe today is not very different when you actually reach out and make applications and even to get a response. But what my feeling is this kind of trust or even bond, or even give you as a company, as an employer, a little bit of comfort that we're investing in you, we're developing you, I see future with you together, right? I see increasingly less and less of this. And therefore, I'd also say, and coming back to this, of this kind of rationale and saying, well, I do a job and then I do traveling. I mean, what to expect from these young professionals, how to behave. It's logical, actually. I mean, it's kind of, I don't rely on you, don't rely on me either, right? So I think this is interesting, but also, when I look back, as it is in every class, I say, you kids are so much better than I was when I was your age. You speak all 3-4 languages. You've been maybe abroad a semester at a university. You have diverse backgrounds. As my classes usually, so now in Vienna, I had 200 people, and I think we had like 37 or 39 nationalities, right? I mean,
Wow.
you know, think about it. It's amazing, you know, to work with
Absolutely.
people. But this is exactly where I didn't have this. So they are amazingly prepared. They're flexible. So to some extent, I would even understand it. They say, look, I mean, okay, if it doesn't work out, then I go somewhere else and do it. In my days, it wasn't possible. So my horizon was much
Do you
much
think
smaller.
that they are that motivated because of the background? I mean, usually people who are, I mean, students which are from not the capital of that country
Yeah.
are but outside of it or from abroad,
Yeah.
they're highly motivated. Do you feel the same in your Vienna University?
It depends. Frankly, you can't even say this. Yes, I'd say I have to really admit most of my students are really very, very motivated. But I have to tell you, and years ago I didn't hear this. But like last year, I had one or two kind of workshops a little bit, you know, so what's going on in the world out there? What's the job market like? And where would you go? Because investment banking is maybe not so fun anymore. Maybe private equity or debt is now more exciting. Or if you can't get straight there, what may be alternative routes to get into finance if you want to? Suddenly say, okay, and what about work-life balance? As a first question, you know, and I nearly fall off my chair because, you know, I had, for me, this was never an issue. This was never an issue. I mean, it was absolutely
Right
clear,
at the beginning
you know?
of the career, you
Oh
never
my God,
think
you're
about
working
that.
80 hours a week or maybe 100 even, and maybe at a day off in a month. So that is new. That is new. There are increasingly such individuals there. And I say, well, look, I mean, there are certain areas in banking or finance you should actually forget about because that hasn't really changed. So you do see this. But again, these were questions I wouldn't have asked back in my time. This was not a question because I was curious, you know, and I wanted to get out. Yeah. So
Christian, this one is a wine from our winery, and I've just arranged a tasting for you, and this is a part of our history, family history, and also part of our love, and really grateful that you agreed to join our my podcast.
it was such a
And
pleasure. And even when I'm back home, it will remind me so much of Armenia and of our conversation that we had here. And you know, luckily I'm gonna be back here in just under 3 weeks. I'm very looking forward then to see you again.
hope you will have a lot of projects
And
here.
on my side, I also may present you something, which is, you know, my recent book just published approximately 4 weeks ago. It's an art crime.
Congratulations.
It's an art crime, and you know, I basically know that you're very good at cracking finance cases, but this time we're gonna crack, all right, I know you can do this, a criminal case, and probably after page 19 you know already who he was.
Amazing. I will read and just make some my comments in social networks. Just and
Thank
many
you.
thanks again. So talk
Pleasure.
to you once you are back to Armenia.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. Thanks, Arad.